Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. This is Douglas Gabriel, and I am talking to our man in Washington, D.C., Christopher Strunk, who has recently put a writ of mandamus in to Chief Justice John Roberts to say that we need to have paper ballots backing up all of these elections. So, Christopher, people are going crazy, our followers, and they want to know what you're up to, so we had to give you a call so that you could give us an update. How are you doing today?
Just fine. I got off the phone with Bill Van Allen about an hour ago, and he monitors all the court actions and decisions by the Supreme Court. He talked to the clerks. He first talked to Duggan, who got assigned this writ, and then it passed his seal of approval, and it went on to his supervisor, Atkins, who I'd spoken with or left a message with on Thursday, that he should fax me a copy of the letter of rejection that was done on Monday. That didn't come in until Saturday, so I couldn't put that in as part of my exhibits. But nonetheless, it went from Atkins, it passed his supervisor, and it's now with the state clerk. And that's 3 of 6 clerks at the Supreme Court. So it's passing over the hurdles that everybody would have to pass to get a writ of mandamus. So that's what I have to report on right now.
Wow, you're running the gauntlet.
Yeah, literally. That's why you have to. You have to. And I'm so impressed with the work that you and Michael have been doing. You know, I've been around computers since Fortran, but you guys are real. And I have a website where I've learned DNS servers and all that business, how to encrypt passwords and stuff like that. I just spent a group of money on a website for members only, and so I understood what Michael was talking about DNS servers and how you can actually protect the DNS server from middlemen and all that business. I was listening to that as you called.
Well, there are many fronts that this war is happening, many different battles, many fronts. And so what you're doing in Washington is something that you're really good at, which is to work the justice system to try to get them to give some justice. And Michael has worked that system too. But, you know, in terms of knowing the technology, it was a mind-boggler to me to sit there and see Trump get elected and realize that I know that the machines are all rigged. How did that happen? And it was only when he told me that the white hats had done that, and that, you know, you understand how to do that. I don't understand that. But the point is,
actually,
many fronts.
I don't understand how to do it, but I have my associate who's been doing this since the 70s with ARPANET understands. You know, so I was very impressed with your presentation just an hour ago. Yep.
Well, we just have to fight it on many fronts. And so now you're not going to stop. And this is what was really cool about what you were saying, is this is cumulative. You can keep working on this. You just keep building, and keep hammering and keep chipping away. So what's next? You got it through 3 clerks out of 6. Let's give us a bigger perspective. You're not only aimed at having proper elections, you're aimed at many things with the government in terms of putting things forth to even the Supreme Court to be considered. So what is your next angle? Can you tell people who are worried that tomorrow this election is going to be rigged, this election doesn't have paper backup, even if we wanted to ask for recounts, we'd have to still count on the non-proper chain of custody that is digital, and we can't really follow those digits. So what else can you give people in terms of hope, or what else are you going to be working on in terms of the next steps for seeing election rigging hopefully come to its end?
Well, just as a footnote, it's important to understand that once a case is in the system as a part of the permanent record, you can always reopen it. And there's what's called equitable tolling, and that if you know now what you didn't know then, that can change the outcome of the case that was closed years earlier. As long as one of the parties in a case is alive, they can reopen a case. Everybody should know that. So that permanent record is useful to the day you die, and probably is useful for the estate, the trustee of the estate. That's the footnote. But yes, my strategy, because I've been fighting this for a very long time, is to reestablish the Monroe Doctrine, which is to protect the Western Hemisphere from foreign influence, and that which changed significantly when Reagan denied the existence of any possibility of any jurisdiction over our behavior, and that at the same time he put Ambassador Wilson in as the ambassador. He recognized the Vatican for the first time. He exchanged ambassadors, and by the way, the Vatican embassy is right across from Mike Pence up on it's either Massachusetts or Pennsylvania. I think it's Massachusetts Avenue. But that so Reagan prevented our partners in the hemisphere as members of the American Organization of American States from actually collaborating and preventing interference, foreign interference in our hemisphere. So that was one of the black marks against Reagan, and certainly Ambassador Wilson going to, it's I don't want to get in some of the back information. It goes into the whole Knights of Malta business, but that I'm ready to go to the Organization of American States and reestablish our good relations. Now, especially now that Brazil has a president who survived a knifing during the campaign, the election, and who's nearly died by an assassination attempt, who seems like the Donald Trump of Brazil. And that I'm trying to build allies so that we can have a legitimate a vote into the future, and that the idea in this application, this writ that I just submitted, and that's being reviewed right now as we speak, is to create a political environment to pressure the court psychologically, and that they know that I will follow through, and my associates have already done that in the work that they do, and that why shouldn't we be seen and criticized in a forum which could legitimately record the complaints and make a public record? That's my position. So the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, and of course I opposed Jimmy Carter, BCCI, Jimmy Carter Trilateral Commission, Carter, on the whole his use of human rights at the very time that we were ripping apart Central America and South America, ending up in Iran-Contra and all that crapola. But that if there had been a strong Monroe Doctrine, it would strengthen our ability to prevent China from interfering in the elections in Florida, or China to interfere with our intelligence community like they've been doing, or running New York State through Jack Ma, who works with Andrew Cuomo, who would take money. He would rob, as they say, rob a hot stove, But that I am preparing arguments which grow off of my warning to the court in my writ that this doesn't end there. I'm not going to be just take my marbles and go home. This is going to go into a much bigger bowling ball game, and that I see the necessity to reform the entire court system, and the way to do it is to strengthen our allies in the hemisphere, and which will be the first time since before Reagan. I don't know if you remember when Rockefeller got hit with a brick in Venezuela when he was vice president under Ford.
Yes, it just should have been a better shot and should have hit him in a better place.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I
would, because I get to say these things because I have a tough name, Thomas Paine in the Ass of the Globalists. And so have you noticed then in your research and what you've been doing foreign influence in our elections long before we started to see that in 2016, not coming from Russians, but in fact coming from the Brits? Have you seen previously, and have you basically brought other actions against the federal government because of foreign interference in our elections?
Well, my biggest complaint, along with Bob Dornan, who lost his election against Sanchez and Loretta Sanchez in '96, without any help with Newt Gingrich, is that the illegal voting in California, which is you spread it between California and New York, you can pretty much sway an election with that in the Electoral College. I saddled up with Bob Dornan, B1 Bob, and we proved that he lost the election by less than the actual number of illegals that voted that he had actually determined with the then the agency which dealt with illegal aliens, immigration, INS. We had proved that there were 4,900 illegal voters, and he only lost supposedly by a handful. So he should have. Newt Gingrich should have supported him. Anyway, that was '96, and Bob and I, he's pushing his years, and as an energetic Irish American who was born in Manhattan along with me. He was born 10 years before I. But I'm my efforts to stop illegals from voting, whether that means putting a purple fingerprint where everybody walks around with an indelible thumbprint, for the days following the election. Of course, they were killing anybody, especially the women in Iraq. If they were to be found with a purple thumb, they'd not only lose their thumb, they'd have their head cut off. So people need to have a way of creating an indelible record on that paper ballot of their presence. And that's very hard to read. It's not like putting somebody's name as personal information on a website or on a piece of paper. But when you put your thumbprint on that paper ballot, it's a signature that nobody can read except the FBI. I think they've got the largest. They've got the largest store of thumbprints. But the point is that it can be very rapidly through a computer figured out who is or is not voting by every time you scan the paper record in. Or if you scan it, it would pick up the thumbprint. And look, it's people who were living down south and are living in New York City at the same time who have voting locations in both locations. That's how a lot of the guns were being trafficked. They had both a driver's license in, let's say, Mississippi or South Carolina, and they had a driver's license in New York, and they were able to run guns. And I heard you were in a halfway house, and I did too, in Brooklyn. So I saw the worst of the worst, not by choice, but by economic necessity. And so I see how voting is done in the same way, where you can vote down south and vote just for the driver's license or the dual driver's license. That's got to be stopped immediately. And that when people pass away and their death certificates are filed, they have to be automatically taken off the voter rolls. That's not done. Matter of fact, my landlord, his mother continued to vote as a Democrat. You have two chances to vote in New York, once when you're alive and once when you're dead. And that the graveyards rise, and I've been complaining about that since the '80s. I've been in a number of cases going back to '76. Jerry Ford won the election, notwithstanding Rockefeller being hit with a brick. But that BCCI Jimmy Carter did not win that election. And I see, Elizabeth Holtzman, who my cousin worked for, the DA's office. She was right when she took all that to court and exposed how the Democrats were running vote fraud through all of the building registration, all the supers and everything else. So it's good evidence on that. And so I come from that perspective of how the Democrats have actually manipulated the voter and their insistence on the National Voter Registration Act that Bob Dornan and I were absolutely apoplectic on when they put that in the early 90s. That gives the basis to figure out both campaign contributions and gives the basis to figure out where they need to do the vote fraud, all right? And that they already know who voted in the last election. They have a record on that. And so they can pretty much target the various precincts right down to the precinct level where they can cause vote fraud. And Michael's description in that last video that you just finished is right on target in terms of, how do you actually do the electronic fraud? Well, you create a perception of the race being close, but rather than a stretch. And so the National Voter Registration Act is anathema. It is, then comes out of the Dayton Accords and the Balkan Wars. Wherever you as a stray person tend to sleep in a ditch, that's where you vote from, and end up as the Dayton Accords. And to help America to vote, or help anyone to vote act, which I've been fighting that since the early 2000s. I was in the Bush v. Gore case in 2000. I went before Jack B. Weinstein on the question of gerrymandering, all right, and how I had both the Democrats and Republicans during the Laurel case in the Eastern District of New York with Jack B. Weinstein, who's actually a decent judge, but that I've been watching the vote fraud, and this could be a much larger program of where it is, but certainly the voting rolls are essential for they to maintain the fraud. And certainly getting people to vote with the purple thumb would slow that down. And
Wow.
Chris Gibson, say again?
Wow. I didn't know that you have been that involved. So I'm assuming that you're going to just keep on telling us one story after the next, because this goes back for decades for you. So this is really, as you said, you're going to share your strategy with us. This is an amazing thing that you've been doing. And I got a question, though. With 17 states reporting from the 2016 election, there were between 3.5 and 5 million votes cast that were illegal votes, that were invalid. And that's only with 17 states reporting. And so we can see that the fraud is fantastic. We can see that the system is corrupt. And we can see that you are truly a real patriot warrior in the fake justice system, trying to turn it into a true justice system. And so how do you not get discouraged? Because we know that John Roberts can just order a judge to be changed in the middle of a trial so that he can get the outcome that he wants, or that any of his lowlings beneath him. They can adjust justice anytime they want, and they can ignore, and they know the outcome by who it is that they appoint as the judge. So you've been fighting the system for a long time. How do you not get discouraged? How do you keep your optimism going?
Well, I try not to talk to too many people, so I don't have to deal with a bunch of negative energy. And you're a positive person, so I can put up with you. And I certainly like McKibben. He's an engineer. He's used to building stuff. When you're a builder, you keep on building, and that's a very positive, attitude. And I like that attitude. So, no, there is always a remedy, and short of dying and going to heaven, there's always a remedy.
I guess if you got that as a fallback, everything else is kind of okay.
Right? Yeah, right. I mean, so, but that good. The fact that the Monroe Doctrine was so important, and it wasn't he, it was John Quincy Adams. Should have been John Quincy Adams' doctrine, but that he understood the threat that Europe represented towards the survival of the United States, and so and the threat of the Masonry, and certainly Andrew Jackson in particular, and actually John Quincy created the anti-Masonic Party, ran again for election, but that the Monroe Doctrine, that whole concept of creating allies who are contiguous to our self-interest in terms of trade, and we don't want people in desperation flowing into our country. We want their countries to thrive and grow, as we were promoting under even FDR, was promoting corporate self-interest in growing the adjoining countries, whether it was for bananas or whatever. But that we've got to strengthen the economies of all of our hemispheric associates, and that Reagan and failed to do that onward. And that so I'm going to the Organization of American States Court, the commission, which will hold and they're looking for an opportunity to hold our court system in ridicule. And certainly they're they're very open to the ridicule, and that's my strategy. And I think that it will help the Miller Act claim, because they've suffered, of all people, the Central and South Americans have suffered from social network software problems, and I think they would join in at the commission, as it is important voting. But that's my angle, and that's, I'm moving on to the next level. Okay, it's called the next level. I guess it would be called the next level. Nobody ever thought of that level. Okay, their main office is in Costa Rica, and it's where the Jesuits are. But that's okay too. And they want to be seen as good guys too. It's hard to do, but they might even bend a little bit. You remember the De Niro movie, The Mission, and it's certainly, the ideology of the revolutionary ideology that they were promoting. Anyway, so I sort of bring that to this whole mix of things, but I'm familiar with I can't do what the DNS, protecting the DNS server and stuff like that. Although I know people that could do it, I just, you got to have time and money and availability, and certainly Michael is the man with a plan in that regard. No, I'm going to do the commission. I'm already outlining where it would go, and they know it. I put that in. I said, you don't think I'm going to stop here. That's in my writ, and
yes,
that's why
right.
it's on to the third clerk, and because they know I've got their names, and they're all going to show up in the commission just down the street at the Inter-American Commission, and
so you got their numbers.
That's my. Say again.
So you got their numbers.
I have their numbers, their names. I know where they work, and I know how vulnerable they are as government workers, and certainly the SES stuff. They know that I know about that, which I'm going to bring all that out, because you got all these members. Look, see, the vulnerability. Let me say this: the vulnerability is offshore accounts within the hemisphere. Within the hemisphere of the Organization of American States, they've got offshore accounts. All right.
Oh yes.
And that becomes an issue in that commission. On their, the 19,000 shell companies in Panama and all that stuff. I know how that works, and I have my contacts on how that works for the last 10 or 15 years. And that I'm just a guy. Okay, I'm just a guy who's nosy, Doug, and I call you Doug. Okay,
you call me anything you want, Chris.
Except late for dinner.
That's what I always say. I'm glad you took the words out of my mouth and not the food.
So I'm going after the offshore accounts that the judiciary have as part of their pension plans. All right.
You are so preaching to the choir. That is what I think is the next thing. And I was going to ask you in a private conversation, is there any way that we can wake up the court system to say all offshore accounts that are tax havens should be illegal, and no money should flow out of this country without first taxes being placed upon it? Which would
I would. Again, it goes back to my way to stabilize the country. And I came out of New York City, which was the Mercy Financial Control Board with Felix Rohatyn and Lazard Frere, right? Which is Eugene Meyer's operation. He was appointed by Herbert Hoover to be the head of the Federal Reserve in 30, and that he was the owner of the Post, and he was replaced when Herbert Hoover lost against Roosevelt. But that the Roosevelt plan basically on banking was that of Eugene Meyer, and that let me say this about pension funds. The pension funds were what saved New York City when it went bankrupt, and that what they did was take all the union pension funds and invested it into the debt, in the Emergency Financial Control Board debt. Well, the step beyond that would be to invest it into the solidity of, a 30-year bond had disappeared for quite a while, and it reemerged just recently. And were it to reemerge as a gold-backed 30-year bond, where the pension funds were put into that, we could stabilize a big chunk of the debt, and we would get the Federal Reserve out of naked short selling and some of the crapola they're involved with. But certainly, that the solution here would to make anybody employed by the government put their pensions into gold-backed bonds. Period.
I love that idea, and I didn't know that you meant 30-year. That's beautiful. That is such a stable idea. Yeah. Now tell me about these offshore accounts. Can we end them? Is there a legal way to end offshore tax havens, which are taking 65% of America's wealth out of its cash flow each year into offshore accounts? Can we end that?
Well, since working for the government, you have no way of losing your job. You can pretty much do anything you want. I would certainly want them to be wrapped up in what I'm talking about. Any offshore account involved must be involved in treasury bonds. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. And if it's in gold, how can anybody object? Right?
Oh, I wouldn't object to that as long as they paid taxes on it before they put it in. For instance, why doesn't George Soros go to jail? Everybody knows that the $18 billion...
Well, first of all, George Soros has dual allegiances. He's a Hungarian. He maintains his Hungarian citizenship. He is the American and Hungarian representative to the European Council on Foreign Relations. That's his official title in the EU. All right. Now, just starting from there, how can you have dual allegiance and be the sole American representative in the European Council on Foreign Relations? It's bad enough that it exists to begin with. So I would question whether or not his citizenship, his naturalization, should not be canceled. From a technical standpoint.
That's a great place to start. And what about the $18 billion he gave to non-government organizations that he stole from his quantum hedge fund without paying taxes? Isn't there a way that, the IRS says they can't do anything unless someone makes a complaint. They can't just go target somebody. Well, hello, that's not targeting. Everybody knows that the Clintons and George Soros have not paid taxes, and the tax evasion. That doesn't take a genius to figure out. Why can't we stop this? Why isn't there a legal path for this? Besides the fact that the DOJ is completely compromised, because they don't even have an attorney general. They have Rip Van Winkle, who's been sleeping for the last 2 years. But besides that, you've been working with this for a long time. Is there a way to stop this ripoff of the globalists who are stealing from our country without paying taxes?
Well, I used to call him Yoda. Now I call him Magoo. And Yoda, at least, you're a Star Wars guy.
Yes.
I was very impressed when I heard you were a Star Wars guy. So my son was impressed. He thought that was just jolly, and that got him to listen to your broadcast. Matter of fact.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Well, look, the dollar represents an emergency fiat currency under our present military spread around the world. And that to the extent that Aramco is going to China, that's a vulnerability. And but certainly the look, that $18 billion could be traced if it went through the banking system, and the big computers are there at the Federal Reserve in Manhattan. They know where it all goes, and they know the algorithms. They know exactly how that money was spent. But you got to figure a lot of that money was walking around money that bought people into the pension funds. And that I would just search to see of that $18 billion, how much went into pension funds as a sort of a walking around street money that Soros spent. I know enough actual professional investigators, including Charles Ortel, who could find the crime in a blink of an eye. Okay, Charles Ortel goes to the women's Republican Club meetings every month, and I see him, and he's a real gentleman and very erudite and knows his subject. For the Clinton Foundation to do what they did for so long in operating out of New York for so long, it goes to the Chinese. It goes to just like this Jack Ma stuff, and Alibaba, who's been spreading money around, street money. It's about laundering campaign donations, and certainly the Federal Election Commission could crack down if they wanted to. The IRS is the last place I'd go. IRS is just
Right.
the IRS is just the bookkeeper for the Federal Reserve. That's all it is, and it just wants to know that their paperwork's in place and that your forms essentially allow them to balance the books. But I would go after the Federal Election Commission, and as I did with Soros in the 2008 election, I had him in state court for improper donations and laundering of money, with 32 other defendants, including Peter G. Peterson and Blackstone. So,
wow, that's what I'm talking about, Christopher. That's what I'm talking about. You've already had these globalist bozos in court over some of this stuff.
Lynn Rothschild was his attorney. She's over in Jersey, a real looker too. So the point is that I've seen it all. I'm unimpressed, but I know how much there was that Simpson, Thatcher, Bartlett. They get paid $1,100 an hour. I got hit with a bill, and so I had a $177,000 attorney's fee levied against me. Of course, that was overturned, but nonetheless, that was an eye opener. That actually got me into the European press. Guy gets hit with $177,000, a bill for attorney's fees. I was asking Brzezinski for his fees, and I got it, and he's not charging as much. But look, I believe going after the pension. Michael Shrimpton has been under the gun. He exposed various acts of terrorism, plus he exposed the CIA's laundering and promotion of Obama, the foreign Indonesian citizen who was never revoked his citizenship, by the way. And that so I've been working with Michael, and he was to testify in the state court, and they blocked his temporary visa, and that I had paid his airfare round trip. And I had gotten Benjamin Fulford round trip from Tokyo. The CIA stepped on him too.
Wow.
CIA is one of the big. Oh yeah.
That's another great case to bring to show that this person who came over on a student visa and actually was a foreign aid student who became our president under an assumed name. How many AKAs did he have? I think 11 or something like that. Also known as, and you're supposed to list that if you're going to become the president. He didn't list.
Well, I know he had 32 Social Security numbers.
There you go. That's a good CIA agent for you.
He was buying real estate all over the place. This Orly Tates had discovered all that with her researchers. She had the money to research that. Orly is a friend of mine, and that I worked with her back in 2009. And all of the people in that period I've worked with, and even Phil Berg. And that, look, what do we do? Well, according to Michael, it's the medium-term notes. Medium-term notes is where all the vulnerabilities, that's where Romney's vulnerability was. He had his money in medium-term notes, where they could make it disappear with a stroke of a keystroke on electronics, okay? They can make his wealth disappear. So when you have that held over the judges and political figures like Romney, where he's going to lose a huge amount of offshore money with a stroke of a key, that's an eye opener. Okay.
Now that is a leverage point I didn't know about. Thank you so much. That explains
that's
so
Michael
much.
Shrimpton. Michael Shrimpton wrote a book called Spy Hunter, and Michael's been my friend since 2014, and he came under extreme scrutiny because he was the one using the glass and water and saliva and fingerprints on the glass, working with Michael Flynn had really discovered who Obama was, whereas the Dunham family had nothing to do with him other than they were CIA assigned to protect him. Right? That he had proven that, and because he did that, plus he turned in a bomb threat during the Olympics in 2012. He essentially just turned in a threat that it was turned over him. GRU had turned over that information, and he was arrested. But the NIST team came in and took out the bomb. It was rigged to blow at the Olympics in 2012, and even Romney said they had lousy security. He knew about it. But it's the vulnerability of offshore accounts to be wiped off. Okay, so when you put them in gold bonds offshore, I don't care where it is. As long as we remain under an international fiat currency, until we get rid of that emergency condition where we can go back to civil government and constitutional rule, that in the objective analysis, I think that we've got to protect those offshore accounts with gold.
Christopher,
okay?
That's genius. You'd give the Queen a run for her money in her 54 Commonwealth offshore fake tax havens, because they're not backed up by anything, and that's where trillions and trillions, some say 50, 100 trillion, more than that, sitting in offshore accounts controlled by the Queen, backed up by nothing, stolen from her 54 Commonwealth nations, including America, which should be the 55th, because we never really got out from underneath British thumb. Now, let's go back to what we're talking about. So I saw the hope. I saw the ray of the hope, and that's the reason I let you keep talking about these astounding previous court cases that you've been involved in and what it is that you've gone after, because you have been hammering on the very thing that would take it down. It's the Achilles heel, in a way, the things that you've mentioned, and that you've been associated with some of the people who have done some of the most amazing work and put their own neck on the chopping block willingly for the sake of being a patriot. And you're talking about some of the biggest enemies we have, and you're also talking about hope. And we are all about hope here at Aim for Truth, because we don't want to just darken your day with the sad reality of some of the knowledge that's out there. We need to give you and kindle hope in your heart, because that's the only thing that's going to continue to inspire you as a patriot to do the work that you're doing. Like, we didn't call you up and ask you to do what you did, Chris. We didn't even know until you did it. And it was just, that's the kind of stuff that should be happening. And we should be doing the same for you, that we turn around and say, hey, we're doing the same agenda you're doing. Why? Because we're patriots. We're all in the same war to regain our republic and to help Trump reestablish the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights, and to get justice back into the court system, to get falsehood out of the mainstream media, which is controlled by basically the bankers and brokers and the people involved in making money off of war. And we need to see things for what they are, which means, in a way, we also have to re-educate people to history, so that the things that you're saying as the backdrop of your own experience are the very foundations of the things that we are working with right now in our time. So I got to thank you as a patriot, hearing these stories that you've told, because I've chatted with you for some time, but I don't know a lot of your stories. So we're going to have to keep this up. But right now, we're going to get this conversation out on the street, because people are worried about you. They wanted to know what they could do to help you. Yeah, I know, and you laugh.
Believe me, I'm protected.
Beautiful.
I'm protected. And I was a street guy. I went in, I was there with dope dealers and people who had spent 10 years in jail. I was in there with people who were released after being rapists and murderers. I was in with Latin kings who were out on parole. So I understand these men. I used to have them down for dinner just to find out why they were so screwed up, right? And I'd serve great meatloaf, believe me. So the point, I mean, the way to people's head is through their stomach. All right.
That's a fact. That's a fact. Okay, so
but you know that
this is the red pill that might taste sweet in the mouth of Chief Justice John Roberts, but it's going to be bitter in his belly if he drinks the water that he takes this red pill with, and he needs to take that red pill, because in a minute we're going to start revealing in another conversation a bunch of his crimes. I mean, this guy is as dirty as can be, but you, again, gave us hope last time we talked with you about John Roberts, and you basically said, look, Trump understands who he is. He understands the the black folder that they have on him, the dark profile. They understand his crimes. They know the blackmail they have for him, and yet he's now going to hopefully be the justice that brings the rule of law back to the Supreme Court, which would be really, really nice. So we heard that from you, but soon we're going to be really trashing him because do you think, in your opinion, that John Roberts is going to take this the way that it should be taken seriously and act upon it the way that he should if he was an actual Supreme Court justice who had justice in his heart?
If he reads what I said in a few pages in that writ, and he gets the recommendation by the clerk who actually run the courts, and he understands that I understand the concepts historically of what the pull the root is, and I understand the concept of what Torquemada did, and all the work in the Inquisition, which was actually, Inquisition means audit. It's a financial audit, and that's all that Ferdinand and Isabella did, was to audit those who remained to see if they are worthy of taxing and or kicking out as non-earners. The Inquisition came to South and Central America, and the concept of pull the root is that of the MS-13 crowd. Okay, you kill everything down into the dogs and cats of the family, and that's how we're letting into the family. It's to kill the root family. That's the danger that Americans do not understand. Okay, and that OAS does, and that they want to prevent what was going on for the last 50 years from continuing, and that if it means exposing Justice Roberts in order to get some work done, I believe a win-win scenario. I want everybody to win. I want some reconciliation here, but that I didn't agree with what happened in South Africa. I believe that the problem was left unresolved, but I want to resolve it here in the Western Hemisphere, and that if it means reinstituting and doubling down on the Monroe Doctrine, and Roberts knows that that's what I want to do. He better know it, because that's who I'm working with, those sort of people. I'm willing to go to Costa Rica to talk to the Jesuits to do it, because they're into cash flow and into control and command and control. So, look, I don't want them here. I want to kick them out of the United States, reinstitute the Bull of 1773, and that, and I know Opus Dei, and I know the Jesuit brothers who have stories also, and I'm eager to hear what you have on the man.
Well, with what's happening with the Catholic Church, everything you just said is you're preaching to the choir, and it's music to my ears, because they should be kicked out of this country simply for the unrecognized pedophilia and continuous attacks upon their own congregation. They should not have tax. Yeah. A tax exemption. Are you kidding? This is literally RICO. This is racketeering. This is a monopoly of pedophilia that is so disgusting. To call it a church is just completely wrong. They just need to be just gone. And what you're saying here is most interesting, because I don't know that people followed the last thing that you just said, and it's going to bring us to another conversation soon. But what you did say is that you want a win-win from John Roberts, and that you are willing to do all this, all that you've gone through, all that you've suffered, all that you have fought. You are still want a win-win for everyone, even for the Supreme Court itself. And that's the kind of attitude we have to have if we're going to move forward and have conciliation and have people reconcile with one another and take the politics out of the Supreme Court and stop playing like we have two parties when we have one, and stop election rigging, especially from people who've stolen the money with offshore accounts, which can be corrected by your suggestion. So I am very hopeful by what you say. And what do you think? Is it going to be a red tsunami tomorrow?
Well, I wanted to be an oceanographer at one point, and I don't overuse metaphors, okay?
Okay. How about a red wave?
But, I went with I have red fingerless gloves that I use to do computer work when it's cold, and I would do a red wave with my red glove without fingers, and that's about as close as I get to a red wave. But look, I think it comes down to people at a local level having confidence in their local level, and that it's called real estate speculation, where you can convince people to leave, and then you get to buy up the land real cheap. It goes down to that level, okay? Real estate speculation, and that if you can convince there's no justice in the voting system in a county, people will go. They'll leave, Wow. And you can buy up all the property at nothing. And that's what the Chinese are doing. Wow. So, look, and that's a communist strategy. You buy up all the farmland, control people's agriculture. That was Henry Wallace in that crowd. So, commie. Look, I have no answer to what you're saying. You'd ask for me to speculate. I don't have a crystal ball, and I think Michael McKibben has a better answer and a more precise way to do what needs to be done, other than standing there as a poll watcher.
But I liked your idea, though. I told everybody, poll watch, to be a poll watcher.
Yeah, but don't interfere with the election like the Black Panthers did.
Oh, no,
right?
no. Heavens,
in
no,
Philadelphia.
Right.
Yeah. So, look, I'm a peaceful person. I would prefer, it's all about the money and bookkeeping to begin with, as long as we're under this emergency banking system. And we've got to help Trump in any way possible, but by helping him win this election, we're helping ourselves.
That's exactly
because
right.
I know that's all.
And that's
but it's local. Everything's local. If you can guarantee that you locally can get a vote which is honest, you'll want to stay where you're at. All right?
So true. I love what you just said. Helping Trump is helping ourselves. And I'm going to sign off with that, and we're going to have another conversation soon. Christopher, thank you for your work. And from all of our followers, we thank you sincerely for being the patriot who's doing this work and taking that ball forward.